Okay, today we're here with Scot Danforth, who is the chief editor at the University of Tennessee Press. And we're going to get his perspective on university publishing, university press publishing. Welcome, Scott.
Thank
Thanks for,
you.
be, thanks for being with us. Tell us a little bit about the University of Tennessee Press.
Sure. We've been around since 1940, so we're celebrating an 80th anniversary. Actually, it just passed February 15th. And like most university presses, we have a kind of regional identity. And about 80% of our list ties back in some way to Appalachia or Tennessee or the South. We do a lot of stuff in history and some stuff in literature and American religious history, all manner of things. And we have a fairly well-defined list, about 15 or 16 disciplines that we specialize in, and a lot of those date back almost all of our 80 years.
Well, and one of the things, if you go to your website, you see it's just an incredibly broad and deep backlist. And as you say, you've been around since 1940, so that's a lot of books. I wouldn't even want to guess. But
It's around 1,200 at this point over that period. And one great thing about university presses is that we tend to keep books in print longer than commercial presses. And so I think somewhere north of 850 of those are still in print. So yeah, it's a great testament to what we do.
Right, right. Tell us a little bit about acquisitions and how somebody would come to the University of Tennessee Press and what that process would look like.
Yeah. Well, the way it works is I mentioned that we have 15 or 16 disciplines that date back a long time. And since that's the case, lots of times scholars who are our main clients and authors kind of know our list as well as we do. They know that if if that person is an Appalachian Studies scholar, that the University of Tennessee Press is one of a handful of presses that they might really want to have publish their book. And so a lot of our acquisitions work is actually over the transom still, and authors will contact us either through email or sometimes at meetings. We go to a lot of academic meetings, so like the Appalachian Studies Association meeting, which is a pretty small meeting, but for us is a really big meeting. We might call people ahead of time and look and see who's doing what in the program and contact them and set up meetings and meet with them. And lots of times they'll bring a proposal with them, and we'll be able to sit down and talk with an author or 2 or 12 and see what we can get going. So those are the two principal ways, either over the transom based on previous knowledge of the press, or our contacting them and finding out what they're working on.
Right. And so now, after you've looked at a proposal, say, so you'd ask an author, give me a précis of what
Right.
you're doing. What happens then?
Well, so if it's something that we're interested in, and if we get to that stage, it probably is, then we would look at it and try to assess where they are in the whole writing process. And if they're pretty close to finishing a manuscript, then we'd probably ask them to send it in when they're ready. If it looks like it's a fairly preliminary kind of idea, then we would probably try to grant an advance contract for it. And the way that works, and this is what really distinguishes university press publishing from other forms of publishing, is we have an extensive peer review process. And that's put in place because university presses occupy a really important niche within the whole environment of academia. And that niche is, in the humanities anyway, is the idea that you have to encounter peer review in order for your work to be approved. And manuscripts and books are still sort of the coin of the realm for lots of humanities departments. And university presses, because they do peer review, are regarded as legitimate gatekeepers for promoting promotion and tenure and stuff like that. So that's sort of the bigger picture of why we exist at all. And so the peer review piece comes in, say, if I have a proposal and I really like it, and I'm just an editor who has general knowledge of a particular discipline, but we need to get specialized readers, scholars of this area to weigh in on it and tell us whether it really is something that's good. So that would go out to a couple of readers, and if we got a couple of positive readers reports, we would take that project to an editorial board meeting. And we have an editorial board that consists of 13 to 15 scholars, and we're a system-wide entity, so they come from several different campuses 3 times a year to meet and consider projects and decide whether or not to grant contracts. So it's a pretty long and detailed review process, which you've gone through a couple of times, so you know
Yes.
the back and forth that can kind of go along with that. And our hope is that that will often result in better work, and the kinds of suggestions that readers make will run the gamut from grammatical suggestions to, hey, really, if you're going to talk about this, you need to read this cutting edge book that's not in your bibliography, you know, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how it works.
And in fact, it's very helpful on a number of levels, not only for the suggestions that those readers made, which I found very helpful in both the projects that I was working with you on, but also in networking. In other words, you know, I've continued to be in contact with some of the people who were originally who I met through being readers of the book. So that's it's a kind of nice promotional tool, and you know, but one of the things you said there really struck me as so distinctive and different from the other kinds of presses that we've seen, and that is that you will grant a prize, or you will grant a contract to a book even before it's been completely written, or perhaps even begun. I mean, based on an outline.
Yeah, it's a two-step process for that kind of project. If it's still a preliminary proposal, then we would grant it what we call an advance contract. And that would just sort of set out a timeline for it and provide some feedback early on as somebody's working on something. And so it would set up a series of expectations between the editor and the author on how this can all get done. And then once the full manuscript comes in, hopefully on time and fulfilling the suggestions, the sensible suggestions that readers make, then we would actually send it out for a full review, and hopefully to some of the same people that looked at the advance contract proposal. So in that case, we would actually go through 2 rounds of review.
I see. That's interesting. Well, it's also it seems extremely collaborative.
It
Um,
is.
one of the one of the things that we've been talking about here is the fact that at least in the independent publishing world, every press seems to have to invent its own process as it goes along, and and depending on its mission, depending on logistics. You know, I've talked to, for instance, Johnny Temple and Imad. Ibrahim Ahmad at Akashic Books, and they talked about they have a 5-person panel, and if one of those people is excited about it, then the others, you know, will either fall into line or not. But it's a, you know, kind of a combative or
Sure.
to some extent negotiated process. With me at Etruscan Press, I'm pretty much the reader. You know, that it's that this is it. I mean, if it's prose, I'll send it out to my prose editor, but it's all in house. But for you guys, I heard you mention there's 13 people on your editorial board. Boy, I'd love to be a fly on that wall, because how many books do they consider
Right.
in a
Well,
meeting?
we publish about 35 new titles a year. And so the way it works is we will, before the meeting, a good deal before the meeting, a month to 6 weeks, we'll have everything prepared for them to look at. And we'll assign a project to each scholar. And hopefully, whatever the manuscript under consideration will fall in line with the discipline that that particular scholar is an expert in. And that works out most of the time. Sometimes people have to read stuff that's not really in their field, but they know what a good book is, you know, and so that makes it easy. And so they actually prepare a report themselves. So in addition to the outside review, the board member will weigh in. Principally, what they're doing is comparing the reports and trying to pick out what they think is legitimate about it. But they also sometimes will have suggestions of their own. And so there's a lot of feedback that we get. And the reason we do that really is because me and the other full-time acquisitions editor don't really pretend to be, experts in these fields. I mean, my background, I have a master's degree in philosophy, and we don't publish any philosophy, thank God. And the two areas that I acquire in mostly are American religious history and American Civil War. And the full-time acquisitions editor does most everything else. And so I am not an expert in those two fields. I mean, I've read a lot and I know some things that I like, and I don't really like the American Civil War stuff at all. And so it's a challenge for me to really pick things out and try to be discerning about the things that come to us. But I wouldn't presume to be an expert. And lots of times, if I'm excited about something, there's sometimes good reasons why we shouldn't publish it. Even though sometimes there's good reasons to publish it too.
So after a book has been accepted and it's gone to production, what happens to the book then? And now it's in your your line for the
Yeah.
next season, and what does your staff do at that stage?
Okay, sure. So there's usually, because we get so much feedback after the board meetings, there's usually a negotiation about when a manuscript should be delivered. And sometimes there's quite a bit of lag there. I mean, if there are some fairly dramatic suggestions for revisions sometimes. But once it does come to us, we have the same kinds of departments that you would encounter at a commercial press or an independent house. We have a copy editing department, and we have a copy editing coordinator. I think you worked with John, and he's a really nice guy. And his job is to farm out the manuscripts to a fleet of freelance copy editors that we have, some of whom have worked at the press longer than I have, and that was back in the 19th century, I think. And so they will work on just basically stylistic elements. And since the manuscript has been so heavily reviewed, most of the substantive stuff doesn't have to be dealt with by our copy editors. They're mainly focusing on line editing. And then they'll send it back, and the author will get a chance to approve the changes that the copy editor has suggested, or not approve them. We rely on authors to be good stewards of their own work, and for the most part, they really are. And then it goes to our design department, and we have two designers, one who's a sort of production coordinator in addition to doing some design, and also a full-time designer. And so they will work up designs for the cover and for the layout and all that sort of stuff. And then it goes to our marketing department once we have page proof to look at and we're thinking about when the book is going to come out. And overall, it takes about a year from the time the manuscript enters our copy editing department and comes out as a finished book. I mean, sometimes a little quicker than that and sometimes a little slower than that. And our marketing team in particular kind of needs, since they sort of think in terms of fall, winter seasons and spring, summer seasons and the catalog, they need to have some time to focus on what's immediately in front of them and then also put things in the queue. So that's kind of how that works. And I suspect that it's pretty much the same way at a lot of commercial houses and independent houses.
Right. Yeah. And the role of freelancers is really key. And I know that's true for you guys and for us. Our designers are people we've just found along the way, and we contract for we don't have any full time, but obviously we're not doing 35 titles either. So you obviously have a much bigger staff, and you need it for that size of the operation. Which brings me to ask about the relationship with the university.
Yeah. I mentioned that we are a system-wide entity, and for us that means that we serve under the University of Tennessee system, which includes campuses at Knoxville, where we are, and campuses at Chattanooga, and also at Martin. Those are the three academic campuses. There's some other campuses that don't have board members. But the university supports our mission. They help subvent part of our budget. Our real purpose, as I mentioned earlier too, is to serve as a key component of how professors get promoted and really how they communicate. It's maybe important to mention that. You mentioned that there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, and that you keep up with some of the readers that looked at your project. And part of our function is this kind of undefinable thing where what we've done is tossed a pebble into a pond, and we're waiting for the ripples to kind of go out. So regardless of whether, I mean, even if we weren't publishing books, our role would be to promote scholarly communication. And we do that with all the other institutions that are part of the university, both at the system level, but places like the library and, all the other bodies that are supposed to be talking to each other, which is certainly a challenging time at this time. So.
And in fact, before we started recording, we were talking about the effect of this pandemic on publishing. What do you think about that, Scott? What do you think? How are we going to come out the other side here?
Right. Well, it's a great question, and we have an opportunity, I think, to really think about things in a different way. I mean, we want to stay committed to our primary mission, which is publishing books and promoting scholarly communication. Just in the short term, we've had difficulties with our supply chain. We had our warehouse closed down. It's in Chicago, and Illinois is a real hot spot for COVID-19. They closed down fairly quickly in mid-March, and they reopened under really strict safety protocols just last week. And so for a while there, nothing could go in and nothing could go out. So there's kind of an immediate effect. Oddly enough, it's too long a story to go into. Oddly enough, that probably won't affect our bottom line right away because of the way that bills get paid in the publishing industry or don't get paid. And they extended terms and did all kinds of things to make sure that our clients, aren't going to just return all the books. I mean, that may well happen. And probably that a couple of weeks ago, Barnes and Noble closed 500 stores in one day. So there's a lot of concern about what the retail landscape, in particular, is going to look like after all this. But I often say that maybe the way forward is the way back. And so what I mean by that is we started out in 1940 as sort of an adjunct of our printing services division at the university. And so our mission was really closely aligned with the campus and whatever needs that researchers and people like that had. And I can foresee a future when our mission is more closely aligned with what's going on our campus and what's going on with the research strengths of the university. In fact, we're getting ready, in our case, to reorganize so that we may well report to our university library, even as the system continues to support us financially. So there's a lot of realignment that could happen in all that. I think our books are better now than they were 30 years ago. I know that we've been more selective, and some of the things that come out just astound me. And so I'm just grateful that we're able to continue our mission.
And so am I, and I think so are the many scholars and readers and students whose lives you affect, whose academic careers you affect, and who are the beneficiaries of this both regional and national press that you've been the steward of now for, I won't even say how many years, Scott.
Yes, let's not.
But and then, so my last question is really about the whole university press. I mean, you've been very eloquent here about the university press mission. Your mission is to communicate and to enhance, promote scholarship in a wide variety of areas. Do you find yourself in contact with or in some relationship with other university presses? And does your mission, is it affected by theirs?
Yeah, there's an umbrella group that all the university presses and some other research presses that sometimes are associated with universities belong to, and it's called the Association of University Presses, and we talk a lot. We do compete in some ways. Some other presses have disciplinary strengths that are similar to ours, but there's a real spirit of collaboration that goes on between different member presses, and we support one another in a lot of ways. And that's really clear in the current situation. There's been a real opening up of forums, and there's even an Association of University Presses hangout that's going to go on. In fact, I think it went on this morning, and it was about a discussion between marketing professionals and how they're trying to respond to the fact that they can't get anybody on the phone, and they can't get people to accept ads. And so how are they reacting to getting the word out about books? So there is a real strong organic connection between various university presses. And even though, not a lot of people know who we are, there have been university presses in this country since 1890. And we have a long-standing relationship with the institutions that we reside at.
Thank you very much, Scot Danforth, for being with us today, and we will stay in touch.
That sounds great. It was my pleasure. Thank you, Phil.
All right.